Emma's hands shook as she adjusted the photo frame on the nightstand, the edges of the glass catching the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The memory of that night was still so vivid it felt like it was happening again, a strange mix of fear, longing, and guilt curling in her chest. It had started innocently, a quiet evening at home when Mark had gone out of town for work, leaving her alone with the house and a sense of restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She had heard the knock before she even knew who it was, a soft, polite tap on the bedroom door that immediately made her heart skip a beat, though she couldn't explain why, and when she opened it, there was James, her father-in-law, standing there with a small, apologetic smile, holding a folder in his hands and insisting he had only come to discuss some minor paperwork. There was a strange calm in his presence, a warmth in the way he spoke, and she noticed the small gestures, how he adjusted his glasses nervously, how his eyes lingered on hers just a moment too long, that made her forget to close the door behind him. She invited him in, telling herself it was only polite, only family, yet as he walked past her into the room, the air seemed heavier, charged with a tension neither of them acknowledged but both felt. They sat on the edge of the bed, a safe distance apart at first, and started talking about mundane things, work, bills, and Mark's habits, but somehow, every word carried a hidden meaning, a subtle intimacy that Emma couldn't escape. She realized that she had been lonely, not just for physical company, but for someone who understood her, who listened to her dreams and fears without judgment, and suddenly, James was doing exactly that, leaning in slightly, nodding, asking questions that made her think, made her laugh quietly in ways that surprised her. Time passed without them noticing. The sun had set hours ago, and the rain had begun tapping against the window, the sound almost hypnotic, wrapping around them like a cocoon, and Emma felt her emotions twist into something she didn't want to name. She was married to Mark, the love of her life, yet here she was, heart pounding in her chest, a strange connection forming with the one person she was told to respect and keep at a distance. James's voice softened as he shared stories of his youth, moments of failure and regret, the dreams he never chased, and Emma found herself drawn to his honesty, to the way he revealed pieces of himself so effortlessly, as if trusting her alone with secrets no one else had heard. She laughed when he made jokes, and she felt a warmth spreading through her that had little to do with humor. It was a comfort, a closeness that unsettled her in the most thrilling way. Hours seemed to collapse into one another, and at some point, they realized the house was silent except for the rain and their own voices, and neither wanted to break the spell. Emma's chest felt tight, emotions swirling, because she knew that what was happening was dangerous, not in a physical sense, but emotionally, a quiet storm of attraction and understanding that could never be named aloud, yet demanded acknowledgement. She remembered the way his hand had brushed against hers when he handed her a pen, the fleeting contact sending a shiver up her arm, and how he had looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her heart ache with both longing and fear. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself of Mark, of the vows she had made, of the life she had chosen, but there was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist, a silent conversation that passed between them in glances, in small smiles, in the way the rain made the room feel like the outside world didn't exist. That night, they sat close, talking about everything and nothing, and when James finally stood to leave, the air seemed impossibly heavy, filled with unsaid words and emotions too complex to voice. He lingered by the door, glanced back at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked in understanding, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in the quiet of the bedroom, a bond that neither could name but that would linger long after he left. Emma closed the door behind him, her heart racing, the room suddenly too quiet, too empty, and she sank onto the bed, her mind replaying every glance, every word, every small gesture that had made her feel alive and terrified at the same time. She knew that this moment, this connection, would change everything. How could it not? Yet she also knew that it wasn't about betrayal in the way the world would see it. It was about discovering emotions she had buried under routine, love, and loyalty. A reminder that her heart could feel deeply, unexpectedly, and uncontrollably. Tears pricked her eyes, not of shame but of realization, that the line between familial closeness and emotional intimacy could be so thin, and that sometimes, the most dangerous connections were the ones that opened the soul instead of the body. Emma reached for the photo again, her fingers tracing the frame, and she realized she would never forget the look in James's eyes that night, the way he had spoken, the quiet weight of the moment, and the strange thrill of feeling truly seen, truly understood, in a way that made her question everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the complexities of the heart. And as she turned off the lamp and lay back, staring at the ceiling, the rain still tapping softly against the window, she understood that this was only the beginning, the night that had opened a door she could never close, a night that would haunt her with longing, curiosity, and the painful, beautiful truth of human emotion. Emma couldn't shake the memory of that night, and in the days that followed, everything at home felt sharper, smaller, more intense, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets she couldn't yet name, and she found herself noticing James in ways that surprised her, the casual gestures of a father-in-law suddenly carrying a weight she hadn't anticipated, from the way he smiled when he recounted a story from his youth to the quiet patience in his eyes when she explained her worries about Mark's busy schedule, and she began to understand that the connection they had shared wasn't just fleeting, it was a subtle awakening of something she had ignored in herself, a longing to be truly heard, truly seen, and understood on a level that her everyday life rarely allowed, and it was impossible not to feel the pull every time James walked into the room, his presence commanding attention without demanding it, a strange balance of familiarity and intrigue that made her heart race even when they were simply talking about mundane things, the rain outside tapping gently against the windows as if it were conspiring to keep the two of them suspended in their own world, a world where conversation flowed freely, unguarded, and yet charged with an intimacy that Emma could neither define nor resist, and she felt both exhilarated and guilty because she loved Mark deeply, and yet she couldn't ignore the emotional magnetism James seemed to wield effortlessly, a quiet but persistent force that drew her closer with every word and gesture, making the afternoons stretch longer than they should, the small talks on the couch, the shared laughter over old stories, the confessions of fears and regrets becoming the highlight of her day, leaving her both confused and alive, wondering how a simple visit from her father-in-law could stir such complexity in her heart, and soon, Emma noticed that her thoughts lingered on him long after he left, replaying conversations, imagining replies, analyzing the soft shifts in tone, the way his eyes would meet hers for a fraction longer than necessary, and she felt herself longing for those moments in a way she hadn't anticipated, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and emotional dependence that scared her because it was so real, so undeniable, and yet completely intangible, because nothing had crossed physical boundaries, and yet everything had shifted emotionally, irrevocably. She found herself creating excuses to see him, small reasons that felt innocent on the surface, questions about Mark's work schedule, advice on household decisions, even simple errands that allowed her to be near him for a moment longer. And every encounter carried the same quiet electricity, the same tension wrapped in familiarity, leaving her dizzy with conflicting emotions, because while she craved his attention and the unspoken understanding between them, she also feared what it meant for her marriage, for Mark, for the life she had promised to protect, yet she couldn't deny that the emotional intimacy offered something that her daily routines had long left vacant, a spark of vitality, a mirror reflecting parts of herself she hadn't dared explore. And so, afternoons stretched into evenings, and evenings stretched into nights filled with thoughts of James's soft voice, the laughter that lingered in her memory, the warmth in his presence, and the way he listened with an intensity that made her feel like her words mattered in a way they rarely had elsewhere, and she caught herself smiling at small messages from him, pondering his opinions long after he spoke, and realizing that the subtle emotional closeness was beginning to shape her day, her mood, and even her dreams, the gentle tension simmering under the surface, tender and unsettling, like a storm waiting to break, yet so delicate she feared the slightest word could shatter it, leaving behind only regret. Emma began to recognize patterns, noticing how James seemed to gravitate toward her in conversation, how he shared pieces of his own life that he didn't share with Mark or anyone else, and she realized that the emotional bond was a two-way street, that he sought her company with a quiet eagerness, a longing of his own that mirrored hers, and every glance, every laugh, every shared silence became a thread weaving them closer together, pulling her into a complicated web of feelings she hadn't expected, and she struggled with guilt, questioning herself constantly, reminding herself that this was wrong, that she loved Mark, and yet, the emotional connection felt inevitable, unstoppable, a force that couldn't be reasoned away. One evening, she found herself alone with James again while Mark had stayed late at work, and the rain poured heavily outside, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat, and they found themselves sitting together in the bedroom that Mark used as his office, the room dimly lit, quiet, and intimate in a way that invited honesty, and they spoke for hours, sharing dreams and disappointments, hopes and regrets, memories of lost loves, missed opportunities, and unspoken fears, and with every word, the tension built, a delicate, emotional pull that neither could name but both recognized, a magnetic connection of understanding and vulnerability that made Emma's chest ache with longing, and though nothing physical occurred, the emotional closeness was so profound, so consuming, that it felt almost tangible, a shared heartbeat across the space between them, binding them together in ways neither had anticipated, leaving Emma both exhilarated and terrified. Because she knew that this connection was changing her perception of Mark, of love, of herself, and she couldn't tell how far it would go, whether it would fade like a dream or linger like a permanent ache in her heart. Nights became a delicate dance of avoidance and desire, her mind constantly replaying conversations, analyzing moments, searching for hidden meanings, for signs of mutual longing, and she felt the weight of each encounter, the electricity of proximity, and the thrill of being seen by someone who understood her in ways Mark sometimes couldn't, yet without crossing the line into betrayal, though she feared that each meeting, each glance, each word, drew them closer to a boundary she wasn't sure she could resist. Emma also noticed how James seemed to soften around her, how his smiles carried an extra warmth, how his advice felt tinged with personal care, and she realized that the bond they were building was no longer casual or fleeting, it was forming into something deep, an emotional connection that transcended ordinary family interactions, and she found herself both craving and fearing it, longing for his presence yet aware of the potential consequences, feeling her heart pulled in directions she had never imagined, caught between loyalty and awakening, desire and restraint, love and temptation. She began to write notes she never intended to send, recording thoughts she couldn't voice, reflecting on moments that made her cheeks flush, feelings that left her restless at night, heart racing, mind spinning, and she recognized that these moments were shaping her in ways she didn't fully understand yet, stirring emotions that were powerful, beautiful, and terrifying all at once, and she felt herself changing, discovering a part of herself that she had ignored, a capacity for deep emotional connection, vulnerability, and longing that both exhilarated and terrified her, leaving her in a constant state of emotional tension, caught between the life she had promised herself and the unexpected storm of feelings that James's presence had awakened, a storm she didn't know how to navigate but couldn't deny, because every encounter, every glance, every shared secret deepened the bond, and Emma realized with a mixture of awe and fear that nothing would ever be the same again. The tension between Emma and James continued to grow, a quiet, unspoken force that seemed to thrum in every room they shared, and although nothing had crossed physical boundaries, the emotional closeness was becoming almost unbearable, leaving Emma restless and distracted, her thoughts looping endlessly back to him, to the way he listened, the way he seemed to understand her without judgment, the way his laughter felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky, and she caught herself noticing him in ways that made her heart flutter and her stomach twist, simple gestures like the way he tilted his head while considering a story she told, or the soft furrow of his brow when he worried for her, and every small moment carried a weight that was both thrilling and terrifying, because she knew she was opening herself up to a storm of emotions she couldn't fully control. Days became a balancing act of longing and restraint, her heart pulling her toward him while her mind reminded her of Mark, of the vows she had taken, of the life they were supposed to share, and yet, the pull was irresistible, the attraction emotional and subtle, manifesting in lingering glances, shared laughter that lasted too long, and quiet conversations that seemed to stretch time itself, making the world outside the bedroom fade until it existed only as background noise to their connection, a connection that grew deeper with each meeting, each exchange, and each revelation of vulnerability, and Emma realized with both awe and fear that she had never felt understood in this way before, that James saw parts of her she had kept hidden even from herself, and that awareness both exhilarated her and frightened her because it demanded honesty, trust, and emotional courage she wasn't sure she was ready to give, yet couldn't deny wanting to. She found herself thinking about him constantly, analyzing each interaction, replaying their conversations in her mind, imagining what it would be like to reach for him in moments when the world felt heavy, when Mark was absent, when silence pressed in, and she felt the ache of desire, not the kind that was physical, but the kind that twisted in the heart and whispered promises of connection and understanding, a longing that was both pure and complicated, gentle and urgent, leaving her breathless even as she reminded herself that nothing should happen, that she was married, and that boundaries existed for a reason, and yet the temptation of emotional closeness was a siren song she could not ignore. 1. Rainy afternoon, as the storm rattled the windows and the soft patter of water filled the room, James stayed late at the house under the pretext of helping with Mark's work, and they found themselves alone again in the bedroom, sitting near each other, their conversation drifting from casual topics to confessions, secrets, and stories they had never shared with anyone else, and with each word, the bond strengthened, a magnetic pull that neither could name but both recognized, the room itself seeming to shrink around them, containing their whispered laughter, shared memories, and the quiet intimacy of being seen without pretense. Emma felt herself relax in ways she hadn't realized she needed, her shoulders dropping, her chest unclenching, as she realized that James's presence brought a comfort and understanding she couldn't find elsewhere, yet at the same time, it left her shaken, because the feelings she was experiencing were dangerous in their subtlety, a heady mixture of excitement, longing, guilt, and admiration, and every glance, every word, every soft smile carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She noticed how he mirrored her emotions, how his attention to her seemed deeper than casual kindness, how his questions probed gently but persistently into her heart and mind, and she began to understand that this connection was more than friendship, more than familial care. It was an emotional intimacy that transcended simple relationships, yet it existed in a gray space that made her constantly question her own motives, her own heart, and the lines she had drawn between loyalty and desire. Love and awakening. Nights became restless as she replayed their encounters, analyzing his voice, his expressions, the quiet moments when he lingered near her, and she felt herself growing more attached, more dependent on the small bursts of attention and understanding he gave, even as she struggled with guilt, knowing that Mark deserved her love and loyalty, that she had made vows she wanted to honor, and yet the emotional closeness was addictive, a fire she could not extinguish, lighting parts of her heart she had long ignored. They began sharing more than stories, they shared dreams and fears, the kind of intimate revelations one usually reserves for a soulmate, and Emma realized with a mixture of shock and wonder that she had never felt this alive with anyone, not even Mark. And while she loved her husband, this connection was different. It was raw, honest, immediate, and unfiltered, a connection that made her feel understood in ways that made her chest ache and her heart race with the intensity of emotions she had buried under routine and duty. Every meeting left her trembling with a mix of exhilaration and anxiety, and the tension built not because of actions taken, but because of feelings allowed to flourish, feelings that were dangerous in their honesty, their depth, and their intensity. And Emma began to recognize that this was no longer casual or incidental. It was a force that was reshaping her understanding of intimacy, trust, and emotional closeness, forcing her to confront emotions she had long avoided and to question what she truly wanted in her life, in her heart, and in her marriage. She found herself imagining future conversations, moments of quiet togetherness, the comfort of being understood without words, and the ache of longing when James was gone, the room suddenly empty, the silence pressing, the absence of his presence almost physical, and she realized with a mixture of fear and longing that she had opened herself to something transformative, a bond that could never be erased, that had changed her fundamentally, and that would demand choices she wasn't yet ready to make. The emotional pull was constant, a steady undercurrent beneath the surface of her daily life, coloring her thoughts, shaping her interactions, and leaving her caught between loyalty and awakening, love and curiosity, stability and the thrilling uncertainty of human connection. And Emma knew that the heart she thought was simple and steadfast was now alive in ways that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure, leaving her wondering how far this connection could go, how much she could allow herself to feel, and what it might mean for the life she had built, the love she had promised, and the boundaries she had always trusted, and she realized with a quiet, startling clarity that the emotional intimacy she shared with James was no longer something that could be ignored, minimized, or rationalized away, because it had become a defining part of her heart, her thoughts, and the delicate web of feelings that made her human, leaving her suspended in a state of emotional tension, a storm of longing, guilt, and exhilaration, a storm that would shape every choice she made in the days to come, and one she could not escape. Emma's world shifted in a single moment she hadn't expected, the delicate tension that had been building between her and James suddenly colliding with reality in a way that left her breathless and shaken, because Mark had returned home earlier than she anticipated, his car crunching softly on the driveway, the familiar sound sending a jolt through her chest, and before she could even think to compose herself, he was standing in the doorway, eyes wide, taking in the scene with a mixture of surprise and quiet understanding that left her frozen in place, heart hammering, and in that instant, everything she had been trying to navigate emotionally, her longing, her guilt, her unspoken connection with James, was laid bare, exposed in the most terrifying and revealing way possible, and she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest, her mind racing with fear, shame, and uncertainty, wondering how she could possibly explain the complexity of her feelings without breaking the fragile bonds she so desperately wanted to protect, yet simultaneously feeling a strange, inexplicable calm in the fact that Mark's expression was not the fury she had feared, not anger, not betrayal, but something deeper, more thoughtful, and infinitely more complicated, and as he stepped fully into the room, the soft hum of the rain outside fading into the background, Emma noticed the way his gaze shifted between her and James, lingering on James for just a moment longer than expected, and in that moment, she realized that he had known, perhaps had always known, sensing the emotional closeness, the unspoken words, the moments of vulnerability and intimacy that she and James had shared, and the realization left her both relieved and unnerved, because the truth she had feared exposing so deeply was now in plain sight, yet carried no anger, no recrimination, only understanding, and a quiet, almost sad, smile. Mark took a slow step closer, his voice calm, steady, almost resigned, saying simply, "I've known," and the words struck her like a thunderclap, the weight of years of assumptions, secrets, and silent emotions settling into the room like dust disturbed by the sudden clarity of sunlight, and she felt tears prick at her eyes, a mix of relief and disbelief and fear twisting together, because the simplicity of his words belied the depth of understanding, empathy, and subtle pain contained within them, and Emma realized that she had never truly known the strength of Mark's perception, his patience, and his capacity to see into her heart even when she herself had struggled to understand it, and she felt a mixture of gratitude, guilt, and awe as he continued, explaining quietly that he had sensed the growing bond, had noticed the long glances, the shared laughter, the conversations that stretched late into the night, and while the honesty stung in its inevitability, it also carried a strange comfort, a reassurance that despite the emotional storm, their connection, their marriage, and the trust they had built could survive if approached with clarity, openness, and care, and in that moment, Emma realized that the emotional entanglement with James had brought hidden truths to light, forced unspoken feelings to the surface, and created a space where honesty, compassion, and vulnerability could exist alongside love, longing, and loyalty. James, standing nearby, remained still, his own emotions unreadable yet palpable, the quiet understanding between the three of them forming an invisible bridge across the tension in the room, and Emma noticed the subtle relief in his posture, the gentle acknowledgement that while the bond they had formed was deep and powerful, it was no longer a secret, and the truth had changed the dynamics in ways that demanded reflection, honesty, and emotional courage, forcing all three to confront feelings they had tried to contain but that had grown too strong to ignore, yet doing so without recrimination, blame, or shame, because the nature of their connection was emotional, not physical, rooted in understanding, vulnerability, and the human need to be seen, heard, and valued, and this realization shifted the energy in the room, replacing anxiety with a strange, fragile hope that clarity could lead to healing, to reconciliation, and to a deeper, more nuanced understanding of love in all its forms. Emma felt a strange calm settle over her as Mark continued to speak, explaining that his knowledge didn't diminish his love for her, nor the trust he had in their marriage, but rather, it opened a space for honesty, for conversations that could not be ignored any longer, for a reevaluation of the emotional dynamics that had been quietly shaping their lives, and she realized that the very thing she had feared most, exposure, judgment, conflict, had instead become an opportunity for growth, understanding, and the deepening of bonds in a way she had never imagined possible, leaving her heart racing not with fear, but with the dizzying realization that human relationships were far more complex, resilient, and capable of grace than she had ever allowed herself to believe. And as she looked from Mark to James, and back again, she understood that the storm she had felt brewing for weeks had finally broken in a way that left the air clearer, the emotions more visible, and the paths forward full of potential, not just for reconciliation, but for a deeper understanding of love, loyalty, and emotional honesty. And for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of relief, a fragile but tangible hope that the truth, once faced, could heal rather than harm, that vulnerability could build bridges rather than burn them, and that the emotional bond she had shared with James, while profound and transformative, need not destroy what she valued most, but could instead illuminate the depths of her heart, her desires, and her capacity for empathy, compassion, and love, in all its complicated, messy, beautiful forms. And Emma knew, as she watched Mark and James exchange quiet, understanding glances, that the night would forever mark a turning point, a moment when hidden feelings were no longer feared but acknowledged, and when love, in its many layers and complexities, could be embraced with honesty, courage, and an open heart, leaving her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and hope for the days ahead.